It began when I finally finished my schooling. I was in the Boston area as a counselor to our bishop. And I was a busy man, professionally and in my work in serving in the ward. And I was praying every day, reading the scriptures deeply, really trying to magnify my calling. But for some reason, I just didn't feel that the Spirit was with me with the same intensity and consistency as I had felt when I was a missionary. And when I was a missionary, it was with me all of the time. And it just didn't matter how bad things were, I was happy. And that Spirit just was less and less in my life. So I framed the question as, well, you're just not trying hard enough, Clay. And so I worked even harder to magnify my calling and spent more time sharing or studying the scriptures and praying. But I just couldn't address this decline. And then I got an opportunity in the early years of the Reagan administration to go to Washington and work in the Reagan administration. And all of a sudden I found myself with different neighbors and different colleagues at work and different people on the bus when I was going in. And as I was meeting all of these people and introducing myself, I started to explain that I was raised in Utah, and they would say, well, are you a Mormon? And yeah, it's a great church. Do you know much about it? And I had, as I met more and more people, I had more and more opportunities to talk about them, about our gospel. One day, one of my colleagues and her boyfriend had accepted our invitation to come to our home to meet with the missionaries. We were working around to get things straight, and I put in a cassette tape of the Mormon Youth Symphony and Chorus. And they came to sing "The Spirit of God like a fire." And they came to the verse in that where they said, "We'll call in our solemn assemblies in spirit to spread forth the kingdom of heaven abroad, that we through our faith may begin to inherit the visions and the blessings and the glories of God." And I realized as I heard those words that I actually had begun again to spread forth the kingdom of heaven abroad by talking people, inviting people. And the visions and the blessings and the glories of God came back to my life. And at night, I'd have dreams of spiritual things. And as I walked to catch the bus in the morning, I would sing the scriptures out loud. And truly the Spirit had come back into my life. And I was discussing this with a friend of mine, Kim Clark, about how I was feeling the Spirit again. And Kim gave me a way to frame what was going on. And he said, just imagine that you were a general of an army and you have a limited number of state-of-the-art weapons. Who are you going to give these state-of-the-art weapons to? Well, you won't give them to the soldiers who were behind the scenes working on the soup and driving the trucks. You'll give the best weapons to your soldiers who were right on the front line, engaged head-to-head with the opponents, who are the minions of Satan. You're engaged in the war over the souls of the children of men. And that's who gets the best weapons. And I realized with that metaphor that really what had happened in my life was I physically repositioned myself on the front lines, fighting face to face with Satan in this war. And in order to succeed at that work, God had to give me his best weapon, which is the Spirit of God. And every day as I left with this resolve in my heart that I wanted to share the gospel, it felt like that God was at the door to give me the Spirit again that I would have with it all of the time. And it really did just bring a happiness to my life that I've enjoyed ever since. It has not blessed just me, but my family. Is an illustration. A number of years ago, I invited one of my former students if he would like to learn more about our gospel, and he accepted. His name was Sunil. The missionaries in the first lesson in our living room did a wonderful job. And when they finished, the two missionaries bore their testimonies to Sunil. And then Christine, my wife, bore her testimony, and then I did. And then I invited one of the missionaries to pray to close. And our son Spencer, who was 11 years old, had been sitting over on the piano branch, quietly listening. And he raised his hand and he said, "Dad, can you wait a minute? I have something to say." And Spence stood up and he looked at Sunil with the clearest vision. And he said, "Sunil, I'm just an 11-year-old boy, but I want you to know that I know that the things that the missionaries taught today are true. I know that God lives, and I know that you and I are his sons." And he closed in the name of Jesus Christ and sat down. And as Spence said those things, a beautiful spirit came into the room. And I started to cry. The next day, Sunil sent me an email, and he was very gracious at how capable the missionaries had been. But he said, when Spencer stood up and said those words, I felt something come into the room. And Sunil said, "Is that what you mean when you say the Spirit of God?" And when I read that email, I thought, man, I would give $1 million for an experience for Spencer half that good. And that's just been a wonderful blessing in our lives as we have tried to share the gospel with our friends in our home, that it brings the Spirit. And I've almost become addicted to sharing the gospel. So that's why I'm interested in this stuff. Questions or comments? What I would like to do is just give a thought and then see if you have questions or observations.
I recently returned from my mission, and it's been one of the hardest things I've done. Transitioning, I'm still having a very difficult time. So I would like to maybe hear some of your advice, because what you just said to me was really comforting, that I can have that Spirit with me all the time.
Yeah. It's a great question. And my recommendation is call yourself on a mission. Because in fact, you were called to do this in D&C Section 4, which you still remember. And if you're worthy and eager to do the work, you're called. And sometimes it depends on where you are. You need to find opportunities to share the gospel in different ways. And so in some communities, almost all of your friends and neighbors are members of the church. But the great thing is now God has given us an internet. And you can find people online even easier than you can when you were a missionary. Because when you were a missionary, you just had to knock on door after door, and A, you didn't know if anybody was there. B, you didn't know if they would invite you in. Almost all of them said no. It was a tough life. But if you build a blog on the web, or join with other members of the church who are building blogs, you can get on that and you can see who are the people who truly have questions. and then you can have a conversation with them. And when you're knocking on doors, you don't know if they have any questions. So it's actually more, in my experience, even more rewarding to meet people online. And then at points you can hand them over to some missionaries wherever it is they live. But call yourself on a mission. You can do it. Great question. I have been trying to share the gospel for now all of these years. But I have observed, as I have served in the church, that occasionally when you see somebody who took a call to serve in the church and they don't do a good job at it, they're not magnifying their calling, is our language. What I've learned is on occasion, they're not magnifying their calling because they're just not motivated. But most of the time, they don't magnify their calling because they just don't know how to do it. And we haven't taught them how to magnify their calling. And so we'll sit in meetings and speakers will tell us what we're supposed to do. But usually that's not the issue. We know what we're supposed to do. We just don't know how to do it. And so I decided that one reason why so few members of the church are engaged in a constant basis in sharing the gospel is not that they don't want to be missionaries, they just don't know how to do it. And so my wife and I, as we have tried to magnify our callings as member missionaries, we've just tried to figure out from every experience we have, some of which are successful experiences, most of which are not, what have we learned about how to share the gospel that we could then share with others? And so that's why we wrote this book, is we've learned a few things about how to do this work, and we wanted to share that with other people. And one of the challenges you have at the beginning is, geez, how do I find somebody who's going to be interested? And what we've learned about that is that it actually is impossible to predict in advance who is going to be interested and who's not. And the way this happened to us is we were, a number of years ago, went to England to finish my graduate work. And the missionaries knocked on the door one evening, and they had a plan. And so they put it out on our kitchen table, and it was a grid where they asked us to list on the left-hand column 12 people who we thought might be interested in the gospel. And then there were 12 steps that were at the top of the next 12 columns in this chart. The first step was you should invite them over to dinner or something. The second one is go out and do something socially fun. And 3, 4, and 5, I can't remember the specifics, but roughly step 6 was invite them to church. And then 7, give them a copy of the Book of Mormon, invite them to listen with the missionaries. And then there were a few more, and 12 was you live happily ever after. And so the missionaries asked, would we go through this exercise? And we really wanted to be good missionaries. So we said, sure, we'll try. And we were new to the area, so we didn't have a lot of friends. And so it was hard to come up with 12. Ultimately, we did. And then unconsciously, we listed them in order, where the people at top, Ken and Janet Brown, they looked like Mormons. Like if you worked in the BYU motion picture studio and you had to get 2 quintessential Mormons, it was Ken and Janet. And then you went down to people who were a little bit less likely to be Mormons. And then number 12 was truly a marginal proposition. Anyway, so we started with Ken and Janet, and we invited them over. They then invited us over. Then we went to London to watch a theater, and man, it just seems like missionary work was going gangbusters. And we came to number 6, invite them to church. It turned out that Sunday, Christine and I had been asked to be the speakers. And so it was really quite easy to say, would you like to come and listen to us talk? And then we had them over for dinner after church. And as that was finishing, I gave a copy of the Book of Mormon to Ken and said, I think you'd be interested in this. And so we'd like to give this to you. And Ken gingerly accepted it, and he said, well, yeah, I'll read it, but we actually really enjoy the going to the Church of England. I just don't think we're in a position where we want to change churches. And it was very awkward. Shortly afterwards, they left. And we had put the chart in the inside side of the closet in our kitchen. And I opened that up, and I looked at, man, these guys had gone all the way through number 7. And then we failed. And we can't maintain our relationship with them because I was the young men's president, Christine was the young women's president, and we had to start number 2. You know, we just couldn't do this. And so I got a pencil and lined them out. Then a couple of weeks later, a joint colleague came to me and said, Clay, what did you do to Ken that made him so mad about the Mormon Church? And I said, I didn't do anything. And my friend said, well, you did something, because from his point of view, you had pretended like you wanted to be friends. And then as they said they weren't interested in the church, you just dropped them like a hot potato. And I said, yeah, but what do I do? You know, I can't be friends with everybody, and we've got 11 more people that we've got to take through these 12 process steps. And I said to myself, at least I found somebody, Randy, and you didn't. Well, anyway, so number 2 didn't go as far, and number 3, and we got all the way to 12, and he wouldn't even listen to us. And so we took the chart down, and Christine and I just thought, we're just not cut out to be missionaries. Well, we went on with life, and then those missionaries were transferred away. New ones came. They knocked on our door and said, we have this program we want you to follow. And they laid out the very same chart. And I said, man, been there, done that. We're not good missionaries. And the missionaries just pled, don't you know anybody else that we could visit? And finally we said, yeah, there's a couple that live on the other side of the complex. And I'm sure you can knock on their door, but guarantee you, they're not interested. She was one of the flower kinds of artists. And he is, I think he is the largest, he consumes more Guinness ale than any other person on earth. And he is very profane. But, you know, go ahead and visit him. So they did, and they came back an hour later, just ebullient. They'd knocked on the hunter's door. They said, sure, come on in. We'd be interested. They had a wonderful discussion, and then they said, oh, do you know the Christensens? I think they're Mormons. So we became good friends with them as we went through the gospel with them. But I'll tell you, never in a million years would I ever have imagined that they would be interested in the church, let alone become members. And that's a really important lesson, that you cannot predict who will be interested. And in fact, the Lord said he doesn't want us to judge, because everybody has to have an invitation to learn about the gospel, because you know that Satan is always going to try to get them not to accept the gospel. And if we don't give them the option to choose right, they will choose wrong. And it's so important that we as members of the church invite people, because it's the only way people can exercise their free agency. And we have to do it without judgment. We need to deal with everybody in this way. So that's kind of the first point, is when we're trying to find somebody, actually you can't find them by predicting. So then how do you find them? Well, knowing that you can't predict. I have learned that if I just use Mormon phrases and words in my daily conversation, every time I use a Mormon-like word, it signals to the person I'm talking to, I'm a Mormon. And it's as if I open a door for them to come in to have a conversation about the gospel. And what I mean by Mormon words is I can say, well, my son who's at BYU, or when I was a missionary in Korea, or I may look tired, and that's because I'm a Mormon. And on Sunday, it takes it all out of you. But and when they hear these Mormon words, they know, oh, he's a Mormon. But most of them don't come through the door. And that's fine. But on occasion, somebody will say, oh, geez, you're a Mormon? And I then say, yeah, I am. It is a great church. And when I say that, I'm opening up another door for them to come in and have a deeper conversation about the church. And most people don't come in, but on occasion somebody does. And then I can talk to them more and invite them if it seems appropriate. But that's a way that I have learned to open an opportunity in every conversation. And I can't predict who will come in, but some will.
My name's Brandon Lott. I'm 20.
Uh-huh.
And I wasn't able to go on a mission. I have some health problems, so I wasn't able to go. And that was probably the hardest thing I've ever gone through.
I bet.
I didn't go on a mission. Because I've planned it my whole life, and I've always looked forward to it, and I've always enjoyed the stories that my dad shares with me about his mission.
Yeah.
And so when they told me that I couldn't go, when they told me there was a chance I couldn't go, I was devastated.
Yeah.
So one time I was meeting with my stake president, and he looked me in the eye and he said, Brandon, you do not need to go on a mission to be a missionary. And then he moved on. And so I'm going, how do I be a missionary then?
Yeah.
How can I do this? And so I was very prayerful. Heavenly Father, how do I become a missionary if I can't go? And I decided that I need to do whatever I can to feel the Spirit every day, even if it's just for a couple minutes.
Yeah.
And so I started, my scripture study became more personal and more meaningful and more in depth, and my prayer became more meaningful and more in depth, and I started listening to conference talks more, because I knew that I wanted to have those spiritual experiences that I would have on a mission.
Uh-huh.
I wanted to give those to myself. And I was able to find an opportunity. I work in the technology building right now. I'm serving a service mission.
Uh-huh.
But I just kept being, when you were talking, I kept being taken back to how can I be a missionary? And the biggest thing for me was do whatever you need to do to set aside time to feel the Spirit in your daily life.
Mm-hmm.
Every day, even if it's just for a couple minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And then those little opportunities, those doors will be open. So.
Good for you. That's wonderful. So I would say that doing what you're doing prepares you for sharing the gospel. But you want to share the gospel. I had a good experience that taught me another lesson that I think would be really useful for you. Our friends in the example that I just gave, he was the lover of Guinness Ale. They went through 5 of the 6 missionary lessons, and then they decided not to get baptized. And I was just crushed. And in my mind, I thought, well, I succeed as a missionary if they accept to study with the missionaries, go through that process, accept baptism. And then and only then do I succeed as a missionary. But when these guys declined to be baptized, I realized from God's point of view, we succeed when we invite. Because God has given them free agency to choose whether they're going to accept the gospel or not. But they won't be able to express or use their free agency if I don't invite them to make the choice, you know. And so I succeed when I invite, and then they succeed if they say yes. But it's their choice. And I shouldn't exercise their free agency by not inviting them, you know. And once I realized that I succeed when I invite, boy, is it so much easier to do it, you know. And so what you want to do with your preparation, which is a wonderful thing, is now you have to think about, how can I invite people to learn more about the gospel? And when you invite them, you've succeeded. And then it's easier and easier for you to invite them. So I'd say you've taken the right steps, and now there's some easy steps to come on. And the wonderful thing is that you can be a missionary for the next 60 years. Other thoughts? Yes.
One question I had, we here in the Alpine Cove Ward, I'm the ward mission leader here, as well as a ward member missionary, but one of the challenges I find here is we have maybe less than 12 families that are not members of the church, and those families have been cycled through. So the challenge is, what approach do we take, you know, to touch their heart and find that time and that change of heart, and just looking for what your thoughts would be on that.
Boy, it's a great question. And I do have a couple of thoughts about it. Alma, starting with chapter 32, there's a framing there that when people were in a situation that compelled them to be humble, they were more likely to be interested in the gospel because it helps them to come out of the ashes, so to speak. And then as you read through the rest of Alma, you get this cycle that sometimes we call it the cycle of pride, where when they're humble, they'll say yes. When they become prosperous and then proud, then we say, oh, wouldn't you like to know more about our church? And you have to wait until pride and wickedness makes them humble again. And so it only works when people are humble. And if you happen to be in Alpine, there's no humbleness. No, that's not, but you know what I mean, right? But one of the things that I found is that although when you say this will help you become happier and better, and it doesn't connect, everybody needs to have a need to feel needed and to help other people. It comes from the light of Christ in all of us, is almost everybody wants to help other people. So what you need to do is invite people who are not committed to the church or not members to work with you in doing the work of God. So just a couple of examples. A number of years ago, I was the home teacher to an elderly woman in our ward named Julia. And this was a miserable summer Saturday in Boston. The humidity was at least 99%, and the temperature was 99. It was a miserable day. And I just thought I better go over and see Julia to be sure that she's okay. And when I went in, I said, Julia, something has died in this house. And she had lost her ability to smell in her old age. I followed the smell down into the basement, and there was a fridge there that had been unplugged, and I opened it up, and oh, it was just awful. And her son had sent her a box of grapefruit, and she had put it in there, and then forgot that it was there, heard a radio advertisement saying that if you have appliances that aren't being used, just unplug it so they don't waste electricity. So she just unplugged the fridge and forgot what was there. And over the subsequent year, it had just molded and rotted, and oh, it was awful. And I said, Julia, we got to get this thing out of your basement. So I went home and called all of the members of our elders quorum, and everybody had vacated Boston. But I had a friend across the road who was not a member, and I, over the years, had tried every way I could possibly ask him to learn more about the church, and he was just adept at deflecting my invitations. So I called him up and I said, Don, I need your help. Explained what was going on at Julia's house. Is there any way you could help me get this thing out of the fridge, out of the basement? And he said, sure, I'd love to help. So we went over, and it turned out that this fridge was at least 200 pounds. It had been made literally with cast iron in the 40s. And the home was over 100 years old, and the stairs out of the basement were rickety and narrow. We had to take the handles off of the stairs and the door off the fridge, and it took us 2 hours, 99% humidity, to get that baby out of the fridge, out of the basement. And we had it took two 90-degree angles. And we stopped when it was on the second landing and just tried to get our third wind. And Don said, so Clay, tell me about the Mormon church. And I said, frankly, Don, this is the Mormon church. And I explained that we had this home teaching system, and I described all the things I have done for Julia. And then I said, we have home teachers, and this is everything that they've done for me. And Don said, that's just amazing. I love to help people, but I go to Mass on Sunday. I have no idea who there might need my help, and they don't have any idea what need I might have. I love to help people. Would you just promise me, if any of you Mormons ever needs anything to help, call me up. And so I started to call him whenever we needed help. And within about a couple of months, I invited him, would you like to know what makes the Mormons tick? And he said, yeah, I really would. And he needed to be needed. And when we serve the Lord, we feel the Spirit. When people who are not yet baptized serve the Lord, they can feel the Spirit too. And what I found is whenever I invite somebody to help me in my serving in the church, I have never been turned down. Not all of them have accepted the gospel, but all of them have learned a lot about our church, and many of them have felt the Spirit. So, another story. I met a guy named Paul, and I invited him to come. We had a basketball game every Saturday at 7 a.m. at the church, at 7, so we could sneak out, play ball, and get home before our spouses woke up. And Paul just loved the game and loved the guys. We loved him. And after a couple of months after the game, I said, Paul, if you ever have any interest in learning what makes us as members of the LDS Church tick, I'd love to have you come over and explain what we are. And Don said, well, I have a question for you. If I say no, can I keep playing ball? And I said, sure, we'd love to have you here. And he said, great, I'm not interested. So we went on a couple of more months, and he just seemed to enjoy it so much. So I asked him again, wouldn't you be interested in this? And Paul said, well, did the rules change? I said, what rules? He said, You said I don't have to be a Mormon to play ball. You don't. Good. I'm not interested. Well, then we got a new missionary from the MTC to our ward. And it's a tough place to do missionary work, Belmont, Massachusetts. And so this poor missionary had been in our ward for 3 months and had not taught anything beyond the first lesson. So I called my friend Paul up, and I said, Paul, I wonder if you could help me out. So I explained that I'd been a missionary for our church in Korea, and we had, at the time, 6 lessons that we used to teach people about us when they're interested in our church. And I said, Paul, it looks like Belmont is just filled with hardened Catholics like you, and nobody has given him an opportunity to use these lessons. And he's got to learn how to use these in case somebody inadvertently is interested. And so I wonder, could you let him practice these lessons on you? You know, and I know you're not interested, and I want you to be obstreperous and argumentative, you know, but he needs to learn how to do this. And Paul said, sure, I'd love to help. So I told the missionaries, these are the rules. They're not interested, but they're going to help you. And then for the first encounter, I went along just to be sure that they followed the rules. And this young missionary did a great job. And at the end, he grabbed a copy of the Book of Mormon and handed it out and said, Brother Barada, will you read this book? And Paul took it and said, yeah, I'll read your book. And he did. And they got baptized. And when my proposal was, I think you'd be interested on the church. You need the church. It didn't connect. But when I asked him to help me serve the Lord, he felt the same spirit that I felt. And so almost all of us can invite people to join with us as we serve the Lord. So sorry, one more. So I talk about this whenever I have the opportunity. And I got an email from a woman in the Ellington ward of the Hartford Stake. And she explained that she taught in primary the 9-year-olds. And they had 8 or 9 kids in the class. And they just had so much energy. It was all that she could do to keep them from tearing the chapel down. And she looked ahead in 2 weeks. The manual scheduled a lesson on the Good Samaritan. And Nancy thought to herself, I know a friend, Susan, who is the best example of a Good Samaritan I've ever known. And so Nancy called Susan up, explained that she has to teach these 9-year-old kids. In 2 weeks, it's on the Good Samaritan. You're the best example of a Good Samaritan I've ever known. Would you be able to help me teach this class just this once? And Susan said, well, I've never been to any church, but you know, if you think I could help, I'd be delighted to help. So they got together, planned it, how it would go. And at the end of that, Nancy said, now one other thing. In our church, when we finish a talk or a lesson, we have a practice of giving the people in the audience our testimony. And our testimony is just a statement that the things that we have talked about are true. And so Susan, at the end of the lesson, I think I'll probably stand up and give them my testimony. And you don't need to do this, but if you feel like you would like to give your testimony, we'd like to have you do that too. So the plan worked. It really is a wonderful lesson. And at the end, Nancy stood up and gave her testimony. And then Susan stood up. and gave her testimony that the things that they had talked about really are true. And as she did that, she started to cry. Well, when it was all over, they were putting away the chairs, and Susan said to Nancy, "Nancy, I never lose control of my emotions. What happened to me?" And Nancy said, "It was the Spirit of God. And whenever you say something that is true, God will send the Spirit of God into your heart to just tell you that what you said was true. And that's what you felt that caused you to cry." And Nancy said, "It is a wonderful feeling. I've never felt that before." And as they were walking out, Susan said, "You know, if you ever need somebody to help you teach one of these lessons, would you call me?" And it's a wonderful opportunity we have to share the gospel by inviting people to serve with us. It really is true that because we can feel the Spirit as we serve the Lord, we can invite other people who haven't yet been baptized to feel the same Spirit.
Hi, I'm Nat, and I'm an Everyday Missionary. Wherever you are, thanks for watching, and for being someone who's so committed to sharing the gospel that you took the time to hear what we have to say about it. What did you think about what you just watched? Are you eager, nervous, maybe excited? Whatever it is, make a comment. And as a community, let's get talking about how sharing the gospel is really going for us. Maybe you're someone who's been at this for a while, and if so, great! My request is that you click and share an experience. There are many people who are new at this and eager to learn from someone like you, including me. Over the past couple months, I've read dozens of experiences from people in our community and have learned something new from each and every one of them. Before you go, subscribe to this channel and join us on other social media. Like we say, sharing the gospel doesn't need to be intimidating or difficult. It can be fun and easy, and that's what we're here for. The gospel of Jesus Christ transforms people's lives, and you know that. And there are people in your life and all around the world that you want to have experienced the love of God the way that you have. So if you need anything to support you in doing that, reach out. This community is here to support you as you share the gospel and spread the love of God throughout your